If you don't know why, you got to stop what you're doing and make sure you understand why.
If you think about like Ice Age, so in Ice Age, like there was one mission, return the baby, and nobody told them how to do it, but everyone came together to deliver the baby back to the human at the end. So I think of engineering teams like that.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to another episode of Our Tech Chronicles. This is episode 25, and we have a very special guest with us. We have Arun Tenabadu. Thank you for joining us.
Thanks for having me. Sorry, I spoke over you, but thank you for having me.
Of course, thank you. He was the former CTO of EQM, a global leader in commercial tenant experience technology. He held end-to-end executive responsibility for global technology strategy, product delivery, engineering, data, AI, and infra. Before that, he was the CTO at the Console Group, where he led the transformation of Console Group's technology and teams to a more modern, lean, and best practice way of working. And prior to that, he was also the head of online solution delivery at Seek for over 6 years. Arun and I have crossed paths a few times back in Sri Lanka. I don't know if you remember this, Arun, but it first was at Logical Tech and then at Vertusa. Really honored to have you on the podcast.
Wow, thank you, Paiva. I didn't recall Logical Tech, but yeah, definitely could recall Vatusa.
We made a visit out there.
Right.
I think when we were interning, I believe. So I remember you from then. All right, today's topic is organizing product engineering teams. We will cover why team structure matters, common team structures. We will discuss key considerations when designing teams. We'll also discuss evolving the org as your product and company grows. And as always, we'll sprinkle in some real world war stories. Does that sound good?
Yeah.
Awesome. All right. So before we get started, if your current engineering org was a sitcom, what would it be called and why? Go.
Wow.
Interesting. I will go first. Friends, obviously, I'm biased towards that. Different personalities, different dynamics. Yeah, just to summarize.
Yeah, I was gonna go with Friends too. Everyone plays their own specific role, right? There's a Phoebe, a Monica, a Ross, and Rachel. So, yeah.
Yeah, I was actually thinking of maybe Fraser or someone, right? Because of the like varied personalities that you get in teams, especially when you have global teams, so you completely different personalities, but having fun.
Yeah, I like that.
I'm going to take a pass on this one.
Oh, man. Okay. All right, let's get started. Why does team structure matter?
Shall I start?
Go for it, Arun.
Yeah, like it's so from my experience, what I've seen is that teams, and when engineers are in teams, right, it's a massive cost, right, that you're talking about. You put like 6-7 engineers in there and it's a massive cost, right? What you need to do is set up a team in such a way that you're going to get as maximum productivity from that team as possible, right? Kind of trying to justify the investment of that team to do it, right? And team structure matters because like even within the team, they need to be not blocked because they're waiting on someone to do something, or they're waiting on someone to answer a question, or someone's incapable of making a decision, or whatever that thing is, right? And also, and as you scale your organizations, you're then compounded with teams blocked by other teams, right? And I'm waiting for that team, and that's just completely killing any form of the efficiency and the productivity, right? So for me, that's why it's kind of heart and soul when I go into an engineering setup, like how is it structured?
Oh, spot
Yeah,
on.
Arun, I think that
Arun.
is, yeah.
I echo exactly. Like for me, the main thing is how do we improve autonomy, right? How do they make decisions and reduce friction to just get stuff done, right? And if you can do that, you'll find that the teams move faster, they execute with more clarity, and you have better outcomes. So I think basically we're saying the same thing.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think the team structure is what hold the teams together. If you have a broken team, you're not going to get the outcomes that you want. So team structure for me is kind of the glue that put it together. And I think there needs to be certain elements for you to have a high performing team. To Arun's point, you want to get the best ROI out of the money you are investing on the engineering team. I think you mentioned it. They need to have autonomy and clear accountability to what they're delivering. And also teams should include like a cross-functional skill set so they can actually deliver a proper solution end to end. Then other part is more like how they think. Like they should be like mission driven and have clear alignment to the strategy. So when I think of the team, if you think about like Ice Age, so in Ice Age, like there was one mission, right? Return the baby, and nobody told them how to do it, but everyone came together to deliver the baby back to the human at the end. So I think of engineering teams like that. They should be empowered to accomplish a mission, but not told how to do it. So they have the right structure to deliver it at the end.
Yeah, we'll go into some of the details a bit later around like how to form these teams, right? Like I think like the team structure, the whole concept has evolved over the years, right? And I think like coming out of even COVID, that dynamic changed quite a lot, right? Like we went from went into like a more remote model and back to kind of like a hybrid model. There's like different aspects to it. Like teams are not necessarily contained to one office space anymore either, right? So there's like a lot of dimensions to it, like across like multiple time zones, multiple cultures, hybrid, like in person versus remote, and so on and so forth. Yeah.
Yeah, you know what? That's a really good segue to get into our next topic, which is common team types. What structures have you seen that has worked well for you, and in what scenario?
I can. Shall I have a go first?
Yeah, go for it. Yeah.
So, I think Asanka was speaking earlier about a mission, right, or purpose, right? So you got to have the team smallish, right, and we can discuss the the composition, cross functional for sure, right, and common purpose, right, and that purpose has to be related to some value to a user,
Hmm.
and one of the things I've also realized is that teams should be long living, right? You shouldn't suddenly start changing teams and say, like, you're doing X today, or next week you're doing Y, guys, and and everyone moves that way, because that just confuses the team and removes the kind of kind of method that they already have going. So I think for me the main thing is like have a small enough team, having a purpose that is related to maybe even a persona or something, right? But that has, we are going to do this to get X, an outcome focused kind of initiative, and get everyone to kind of buy in, right? One thing I've realized in my life is like, I always especially tell engineers, right? Like, you got to be close to the user, right? If you don't know why you're doing something, and you can ask the 5 whys or 10 whys or whatever, but you got to know why, right? If you don't know why, you got to stop what you're doing and make sure you understand why.
Hmm.
Because one thing is with like as engineers, I think there's some cognitive skills that we develop to provide a solution, right? So if you don't know why we're doing it, how do we know we are building that right solution? Because we just are, we're building a feature, guys. Okay, when you click the button, some magic happens, right? But so if you know the why, then you can actually build a much better solution to address that the answer the why and deliver value. So for me, that's what actually kind of that's my whole principle.
I like that a lot, Arun. And just to add to the why, right? Sometimes you might think you know the why, but you want to have this constant feedback loops where you keep validating what you're building is exactly what they want, right? So that I think having that culture of
Yeah,
constant validation and feedback loops is also important. Another thing I want to throw your way is, so you said outcome focus that's delivering some value to a customer. Another one I think is also ownership, right? I've noticed that if you have a team and that team owns something, they are empowered to do a good job. When there's shared ownership, generally it's like no one owns it, and it's like pointing fingers, and again you're creating friction, isn't it?
100%, 100%. I think that's why teams like I don't know what like size squads we're talking about generally, but you could even have one or two squads by working for the same persona because it's a wide product. but they have a particular, kind of workflow, or that they're trying to complete. So they're very based on that, and it's not, I mean, it's, you got to think of a measurable kind of, outcome you're looking at, right? So, if you're going to say, I'm going to reduce the number of clicks from start to end by, 50%, or by 8, or whatever, then then that's something that's measurable, and we can, like, okay, did we achieve that, right? And we think that's going to benefit the user by blah, kind of thing, right? So I think that's exactly, they have to have narrowed but ownership, of that thing. And the other thing that I've also noticed, I might be slightly diverting here, right? It's like, accountability, empowerment and accountability go hand in hand, right? But at the same time, none of us are heart surgeons, right? So if you make a mistake, no one's going to die, right? So who cares, right? We try, we make a mistake, we learn, and we go. But then you create that safe environment among the teams, then they become accountable as well. So now, like, okay, we goofed that one up. We reduced the clicks by 50%, and we didn't drive usage, right? So go on to the next one, right? But yeah, so I think it's whole tied together, that safety element, and then accountability and ownership.
But like what we're also saying is, so cross-functional teams is a given, right?
Must.
That's table stakes now, right? Gone are those team silos that we used to have back in the day, right? Right,
Exactly.
Dheeraj?
Things over the fence.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Another aspect of teams, which I've seen really work well for us, is yes, you have these feature teams, like what we said. They are delivering a slice of a product maybe, but they have that ownership for that. Another thing that enables these teams to be productive is having platform teams as well. Teams that build like cross-cutting concerns, so that we reduce the cognitive load of these feature teams. They don't have to build like infra and common things. There's a standard way of doing something. Just use it like a Lego block.
Exactly. 100%. So maybe about 2.5 years ago, right, we built this kind of so it was a microservices architecture, right? Nothing fancy, Node, right? So we built a framework, and because and we call it Zero, we build a framework, and that framework was like all the kind of pre-config and boilerplate and all the stuff that you needed to spin up a service, right? So all new services were then spun off that library, right? And that and I think the word now is developer experience, right? I just blew it off, right? So earlier you'd have to tinker around for about 5 days trying to put everything together, right, to spin up a service. And chances are you'd do it differently to I. So the next guy who comes and works on it say, oh, the hell, the other one is different. Why is this one doing it this way? Right? But when you have that kind of library in there, there's consistency. So it helps with knowledge transfer. It helps maintainability, right? And things like that. But yeah, I mean, that was our first venture into this platform engineering kind of thing, right? And then we realized afterwards that actually this thing is called platform engineering, and many people are now doing it, right? So yeah, 100%. I think that's another team that needs to there to support the kind of feature teams.
So this is something distinction I want to make. Based of Marty Kagan, like he's like a thought leader in product engineering team. So you guys originally mentioned like empowered team. So he used this word empowered team versus feature teams very differently. I think what you are referring to as empowered teams who have autonomy in terms of like being able to solve problem and they can decide what kind of solution they want to bring to the table. The feature teams, as per Marty Kagan, is very different, where they are set up to build a certain feature or capability as efficiently as possible, but they are not really looking at, am I solving the right way for the customer? Like their goal is like, hey, I have a set of features in the backlog. I am going to build this out. And they care less about whether it's going to get the outcome for the customer or not. Whereas the empowered team would actually build it and then kind of validate it as you build it with the customers. And if you have to pivot, then you will pivot and say, throw it away and pivot. I bring that distinction just because, this Marty Kagan is like a very outspoken about empowered team and the feature teams. And I know it's kind of confusing. We use both the terms, interchangeably, but just want to clarify that.
So I think what we should be saying is empowered teams. Is that right?
Or empowered feature teams.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's more like a scripted approach versus like an unscripted approach, right? Like you're following like a very specific theme or like a set of guidelines versus you're evaluating along the way, as you build things out.
So now I want to pick your brains on another thing, right? So now you have these empowered future teams, right? And you have this platform team. What quickly happens as your organization grows is these future teams kind of do things their own way, right? There'll be front end engineers, back end engineers, whatnot. And you have future team B that does something else. What mechanisms have you used to make sure that front end engineers from this are learning from front end engineers from team B? And similarly back end, like the same patterns, they're reusing, algorithms, whatever, things like that. Because it's easy for them to also go off on a silo and do stuff differently.
That's a common problem, isn't it? I don't, I haven't, I don't think any. I'd be happy to listen to someone who has solved that one, right? But from my experience, and that's where as leaders, right, repetition sometimes you have to repeat, right? So my main thing when I have work with engineers is that maintainability. That's our number one goal from a tech perspective, maintainability, right? Because we know whatever we build in needs to be changed, right? Needs to adapt, needs to pivot, needs to do all kinds of things, right? And if we can't do that at speed, right, then we're actually going backwards while the rest of the world is going forwards, right? So as part of that maintainability thing, right, is I think there's roles of what I call practice management. I'm not sure what the term
Yeah,
use
yeah,
qualify,
yeah.
right? Yeah, so that's why I say it's like you got to have some the back end, like your kind of gurus in the back end
Yeah.
talking to each other, right? And say, hey, I spun this up, but I'm going this way, right? And maybe that is the right path, but they need to make what I call a conscious decision that I'm doing something different that's going to cause a heck of a lot of debt, right? Because all the other services are going this other way, right? So then what's our plan to address that debt? And is it something that needs to be addressed and all that thing, right? But don't do it blindly, right? Or be as transparent as possible, saying we are adapting something, and then share it and discuss, and and then agree on a way forward.
So the reason I asked is because I mean every company goes through this, right? And as you have different orgs, it becomes even more split-brained, kind of. One thing I've found is the Spotify model. Have you guys heard of that? Where they have squads, tribes, chapters. So the
Chapter,
chapter, exactly. The chapter is what you just described, Arun, right? Where it's like all backend engineers, they are able to share their learnings. Everyone learns from each other, and it's a mechanism of trying to be uniform across the board. This is how we are going to solve these type of problems, I guess.
exactly.
So I want to kind of bring like a different dimension to this conversation too, right? Like so I think we are talking about a lot of these traits that may be very applicable for like a software product company, but may not be applicable for like a software services company, right? Because with a product, like your focus is, for lack of a better term, like it's more narrowed, like versus like a services, right? Like I'm not saying like it's the work is limited, but like the scope is more focused, right? Like the target rather. So I think there's like a maturity level that needs to be achieved on either side, and like we have to kind of pick and choose what works based on which model you're operating on, because there's like a lot of synergies or similarities or like the same practices that you could apply for both sides, but they are not necessarily one to one,
Mm-hmm.
right? Because one of the challenges, because I have been mostly on the software services side, like from an experience point of view versus like product development side, one of the biggest issues is that like you're constantly revolving across like teams too, right? Because you might work on one team, like a long-term engagement on a software services side is more like a 1 year. 2 years is considered like a really long time, right? Like in the services side, on a services side, but like whereas like product development side, that's not necessarily the case. So how do you kind of leverage these practices when you hop from like one team to another? Like this is where I think like when it like why it's important, the organization steps in to do like the right level of investments to make sure like these best practices are like kind of well defined, frameworks are well defined, even like components, reusable components, accelerators, whatever those components are, like well established. And these are not going to happen overnight either, right? They have to conform against like a roadmap, and you have to kind of build them in parallel sometimes. Like you're not going to achieve this like on day one, but you might achieve it like in like 3 months down the line. So I think like everything has to come together, both from like the organization point of view and from the engineer's point of view to kind of make this happen.
Yeah, 100%.
It's a very hard question because you have to solve it at the organizational level as well as the team level. Essentially, there has to be a good supportive organization structure. To your point, there can be a function or a department that focuses on user experience, but individuals who are in that group can be deployed to different teams. But as a group, they bring the same practices. That's how they stay in sync. But you cannot do that for everything, right? Because it becomes expensive.
Yeah. I think, sorry, Uresh, when you're saying software services, did you mean like consulting services? Is that what you meant? It's a good point because I'm only talking narrowly from a product development perspective because the companies I work for have all been building our own product, right? And as you said, we have a little bit more um, leeway to do things and so on. But also, I think it's important that everyone who's listening to this. So some of the things we are saying is like gold standard, right? You can't go from where you are to
Yeah.
gold standard in one day. To Asanka's point as well, every organization, every situation is different, right? As long as you know what the gold standard is, or you have a plan, that's your kind of North Star. You need to guide your way, to what makes sense to your environment, your organization, and the type of service you provide.
Let's talk about building a team now. Let's say you have to build a team, right, to deliver some functionality. Like, let's talk about team size. You mentioned this earlier, Aaron, right? What are the different roles you want to put together? How do you make this team successful? What are the things you think about to make up this team?
I'll start. So, I think team size is important, right? And for me, it's always in that 6 to 9 type of the good old, what do they call it? Can't be two donuts, two pizzas or
Two
something.
pizza.
Two pizza, yeah.
Two pizza, yeah.
Donut will probably be a bit too much. But yeah, it has to be in that, because otherwise the com effort goes off. And I think there's some, some research that says that you can only have like 5 really, really good friends, and you can have, maybe 6 or 7 acquaintances that are good friends, but that's the limits are there. As humans, we can't have more than that, right? And I think that's where that number has to be kind of small, right? And also the thing is, like while teams and there's roles people play, forget titles, right? Titles are left, I don't know, in your letter appointment or something and never mentioned again, right? So there are roles that you play, right, in that team, but it's more equality kind of thing, right? So it's not like product managers are more important than your senior engineer, or the senior engineer is more important than the product manager. There's no such thing, right? And also something I've seen constantly gets overlooked is design. Is the product designers, right? Like they are afterthoughts, or they're not involved in kickoffs, or they do something fancy that's really hard to build, right? And things like that. So it is that getting that understanding of the no hierarchy relationships where there's areas of specialty, keeping it small, right? And kind of the only other thing I bring in is like, while we want the team members to be as permanent as possible, I've seen much value in bringing subject matter experts from other functions, right?
Mm.
So from a product development perspective, if sales is constantly saying us that we are losing sales because we are missing this aspect of our product, right? Then maybe bring a salesperson in to say like, okay, how do you think this is what we are trying to build? How would that how does that lay in the competitive landscape when you go and meet customers, and things like get their input, right? Um, you know, as well. So they are kind of a fly out member of the team, but they are vested, they are stakeholder, right? So that when we actually, we are ready to go to market, we don't have sales saying like, what the hell have you built? That's not what we were asking for, right? much less the customer, right? But you're good, and you're going to get nowhere with that, and that's just a wasted effort. So that's my other thing, is bringing SMEs, right, and keeping them involved in that process.
What about like experience, junior, senior? What's a good balance? How do you think about that? And what do you guys think?
I don't know if there is like a specific format or a template. I agree with everything Arun said. It really depends on what is that you want to accomplish. Some teams could even have sales or marketing people included in it. But there has to be a product manager if it is a product engineering team, because someone has to really understand what you're finding in the research and translate that into a roadmap, build a backlog, and prioritize for the engineering team to build. 100% agreement. If you are UI driven development, then there has to be a design team, and you should bring them up front in front of the customers to do user testing, get their feedback, so you can discover what you need to build up front, not after the fact, to your point, Aaron. And then in terms of engineering, I think there's a term that they're using these days called MTS, member of technical staff. No more titles. Like, you're a member of technical staff. You could be playing different roles depending on the needs of the organization. I think it goes back to what we started with at the beginning. What problem are you trying to solve? How are you going to add value to the client? I mean, that's all the team's supposed to do. Then I think so. What happened is like these teams, you know, over a period of time, right, get bigger, it get more complicated. So I think the biggest challenge is how do you stay focused, right? How do you continue to keep the team small, right, without adding more people, and do a good job of prioritizing work for them.
Yeah, I think one other thing is by nature, like we are sometimes biased towards like what we're doing, right? Like, so like the awareness factor has to be kind of elevated to make sure that yes, like everyone is working towards like a common goal, but like sometimes like that goal is like kind of segregated too, right? Like sometimes like I I don't want to pick on like a specific example, but I had to give an example to kind of explain this better, right? Like so, if you have like a front end team and a back end team, sometimes like the front end team might not care like what the back end team is doing, and vice versa, right? And that I have seen like a lot of negative impact when people have like that kind of like a mindset. Like, so how do we kind of overcome that? Like, how do we get people to like the teams to like care or like at least like be aware? You don't need to have like a vertical knowledge of like what the backend team does in this equation or vice versa, but at least like that horizontal knowledge or awareness matters. It's funny, like um, one of the projects that I have worked in the past, like where we had like all these like different feature teams. This was very evident because they were like only focused on like what they were doing. Like so, I had this idea like when you do like product demos or like sprint demos, you mix and match, right? Like you embed, like going back to my same example earlier, like you mix and match like a front end person with a back end person to do like the demo, so that like they all like get to know about like what they're developing as a whole. I think that awareness matters, and like there are different ways to kind of different strategies people can use. Like lunch and learns is like one of them. Like because sometimes like you don't have to wait till like you do like a sprint demo or like a product demo to understand like what everyone is doing, right? Like that has to be done more iteratively and progressive.
So, for us, Yuresh, we don't have separate front end, back end like that. Our team is a truly cross functional team where we have, like you said, Asank, like you said, there's a product engineer, sometimes there's a program manager to manage cross dependencies, and the front end, there's front end engineers, full stack, back end. But the demo is an end-to-end demo. Are we making way towards the final outcome? So they don't really just show one part. It's about you have to figure it out and work together to
Yeah.
to deliver an incremental demo or something, right?
And my example was the same, Roshan, right? Like, so I didn't necessarily mean to say that it's like an entirely separate team, but
Hmm.
like you might have like a front end person, a back end
Demo. I
person, a
see.
database person, whatever that
Yeah.
position is, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
You
Yeah.
have that feature team, but they somehow kind of go back to that siloed mode that where
Hmm.
they are only aware of like what they are doing.
Their bubble, right? Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah.
There
The
was a Sorry, you go, Paiva.
Now, the reason I asked about experience is also thinking of team longevity, right? Like Arun, you mentioned, you'd like to keep the team intact, but the truth of the matter is usually the senior folks are the ones who get pulled into other high priority projects, or they split their time, right? So I'm constantly in this battle of how do I structure the team such that junior developers progress, they have a career progression, they learn, they uh, have impact, and they eventually take over, right? They learn the patterns, the best practices, whatever, right? So this team still, the culture stays intact, where the more senior leaders perhaps move on to bigger problems to solve. Right. And I've also learned that sometimes you are tempted to have a lot of senior engineers, but then what I've noticed, maybe this is my little experience, is that sometimes you end up with like analysis paralysis. They're all arguing with each other because everyone has strong opinions, right? And then no one's making a decision. So you need to balance that out too. I don't know. That's my
Yeah,
two cents.
100%. I
Yeah,
mean, so one thing is, guys, our obligation is to make sure we are constantly recruiting juniors, right?
Yeah.
Otherwise, none of us would have ever got a job.
Yeah.
And if we were only looking at senior people, we'd never have the experience, right? So it's an obligation that we have, as because of the experience we have learned, and the positions we hold, we need to bring in juniors, right? I know, Pio, you were saying that Asanka is the one who comes with analogies, but my analogy on this one, right? I call student to teacher ratio.
Right.
Again, forget titles, right? Because you get some, even mid-level guys are really great, right? And then you get the really senior one who's maybe not that much, of a teacher, right? It's more doer, right? So you got to always build the student to teacher the ratio, and make sure it's not lopsided. So like I've gone into meetings with, like, tech lead level, principal, staff level guys, right? And we go in with 3 options, we leave the room with 10, right? Because
Mm.
everyone has a view. And this is like, tech is sometimes
Yeah.
flavors, right?
Yeah.
I like this way of doing things. It's not right or wrong, right? And that's where you got to make sure we don't have too many teachers in this team either. And if you do, you got to have one who's gonna be the one, headmaster, who's making the call. Say, hey, shit, we're going this way,
Yeah.
right?
love
But
that analogy.
I love it. I love it.
If you're a when you're an organization and when you're growing, naturally there's going to be new opportunities, new challenges. And as an organization, you should in fact encourage internal mobility. At the end of the day, you want to retain good talent in the organization, even if you lose them for your team. People over a period of time might develop, new interest. They might want to do something different. I think it's okay for people to move around. I have seen personally people do a full circle and come back to the same team, and they come back with much more enriched experience, understanding how other organizations work, and it works out very well at the end.
Asanka, very good point. And it again, perfect segue into what are the signs you observe when it's time to evolve your team now into something else, or make a change to the structure. That happens, right? Sometimes you start with something, you deliver a product, it grows into something more valuable. Now what? Is it the same team, or do you do something different?
I think, like, my experience is, you can, like, if you turn up for the showcases, right, you can get the kind of vibe, right? And when you see that vibe fizzling out, you know it's time to kind of restructure that team, right? And then also, the thing is, if you're always, I mean, I'm more evolutionary change type of person rather than a revolution. So you don't just drop everyone and reform teams, and you see productivity will go down for about 3 months before it comes back up, right? So, but you got to get that vibe of where things are going, right? To Asanka's point is, as well, it's part of career development, right? So if you're really good, in I don't know, in payments or something, right? And you want this person to move across to maybe our, kind of permission system or something, right? That's super complicated. As part of his growth, so even if he's happy, you got to start working on that person and say, hey, look, I think your skill set's going to expand, your domain's going to expand if you go across to this particular team and work with them on that, right? So you've got to encourage as well as facilitate that move out, right, when you're going. But I think when you see the vibe going down, you got to kind of realize something's going, and that's why, right, it's super important, right? You've got to have those kind of, I use that term, practice managers, or head of engineering people that are constantly watching it, right? Because when you're in a team, you're started getting the tunnel vision, and I hate to use this other analogy, but they say it's like when you put a frog in water and kind of slowly turn up the heat, the frog doesn't realize it.
Yeah.
And it's getting bored. They realize they're actually doing crap work. They don't realize it, right? And that's why you got to have outsiders looking in and say, "Hey, shit, something's going wrong," right? And intervene.
Arun, you're on fire with these analogies. I love it. I love it. Um,
I use so many when I talk, talk to my teams and talk to my leaders.
for me, a couple of things come to mind, right? One is, let's say you start small, you build it, like you're building like some payments, right? And then as things become more successful and you're meeting customer demand, your scope of ownership is becoming too broad, right? And maybe that's a time to now break it down into subdomains. Like, for example, you like billing separate now, invoicing, payments. Earlier it could have easily been one team, right? But now it's scaled to a point where it's time to break it up. Another one I've noticed a lot is dependencies, right? As it grows, suddenly you have this new team spinning up that is now doing something that's relevant to you, but is a dependency. And then you get into this, dependency hell, right? And maybe it's time to bring them in, right? And reduce that friction. I don't know. Have you guys seen stuff like that?
I think all of those are very relatable, Roshan. Goes down to some of the elements that we spoke about upfront in terms of what characteristics should be there in a good team. If you are starting to see those are getting diluted for a certain reason, whether it's because organization is evolving or because the problem has changed or the technology has changed, I think those are signs that you should think about changing the team composition.
And when my other point, Paiva, is that when you have this dependency, you got to, again, I think leaders need to come in there and say, look, these are the kind of the relationship between the two teams, right? So in one experience that I had was, we had this, we were doing, bookings, like, you can book anything, like whether it's a squash court or a meeting room, doesn't matter. The logic is the same. But we're also then saying now we can pay for the booking through credits, not through cash.
Mm.
And credits is a whole new thing that you accumulate credits by doing blah. So we had this other team building the credits, and this team continuing with the bookings, right? And it became the dependency. One thing is, luckily for us, we use the microservices architecture, but put a GraphQL federated graph on top of everything. So what we always say is, like, you got to talk to each other and understand, what you're expecting from an input and what you're going to get back from a return, right? In those two teams. And the two teams were actually cross time zone, one in Australia, one in UK, right? So that's like a 10 or 12 hour diff, right? So most of the handovers were, offline, I think, right? Handovers, right? Especially when, we are in winter, we are in summer and they're in winter. It's a horrible overlap, right? So that's one way that we say is define. It's like a contract saying, hey, this is what I'm going to give you, and this is what I'm expecting. This is the error I'm expecting. And those kind of things. And try and keep the live collaboration to a minimum.
Yeah, and also you can look to the industry and see how the industry organize their teams around certain capabilities, certain products. You don't have to necessarily reinvent the wheel. Like, think how you can leverage some of those models. You can take leading examples from like Silicon Valley Lab, some of these companies that are pioneering or startups that are doing things differently, like Anthropic, a new startup catching up on the AI. What kind of team models do they follow? Like, can we adopt those? You should look to the industry also and think like, hey, somebody else is innovating in terms of the team structure, how they are getting organized. Maybe we should adopt some of those best practices.
I think we should end on that. That's really good advice, Asanka. Thank you. Would you like to summarize our discussion?
Right. So that was a really great conversation. Especially thank you for your insights into how product team should get organized. We started off by talking about why team structure matter. Every team exists within certain type of structure. Then we talk about different types of product engineering teams that exist out there that have been successful versus what is not successful, and what element goes into designing a good product engineering team. We spoke about as the organizations evolve and scale, how do you adapt changes to the different product engineering teams. And then we spoke about some real life examples.
Yeah, that's awesome. Arun, thank you again. This is a fun discussion. it's not an easy problem to solve, right? And we are constantly learning and evolving. I think that's the biggest takeaway here, right? So thank you again for joining us. Thank you for sharing your insights, and we hope to have you again.
Yeah, thanks guys for having me. Paiva, thank you for running these programs. I stumbled across it accidentally and I thought, oh, this is gold, right? So thank you very much. And yeah, thanks Uresh and Asanka for having me as well.
All right.
Thanks,
All right.
Thank
Thanks,
you.
everyone. See you
Bye.
next time.